Good evening, everybody. Welcome. My name is Bill Reeve. I'm a board member with Jazz Fresno, and I want to welcome you here. If you're a frequent attendee, you'll notice that I'm not Tom Breen. Tom usually is our wonderful presenter or host who presents everybody. And if you have been here, you'll know that Tom has this amazing ability to give you like a 15-minute recitation of the history of a particular person or group without any notes at all, as if he, I don't know, was making it. Maybe that's the trick. Maybe he makes it up, and it's not true at all. So I did tell our guest artist tonight, Steve, that I may just make up a bunch of stuff about him, but I don't think I'll do that, because, I mean, it's, pardon me, I'm going to read a little bit, but it's pretty darn impressive. But I want to welcome you to Jazz at the Library again for 2020. We've got stuff happening every month through June, so please come back and check us out. Also, before I introduce everybody, I just want to throw out a plug that we have a couple of student programs under Jazz Fresno that I want you to know about if you haven't heard about them already. One is called the Milestones Youth Jazz Workshop, which is taking school-age kids, mostly junior high and high school, and putting them into small combo situations like this, which is great because even when your high school has a jazz program, they probably have a big band and maybe not a combo. So getting to work in this sort of situation is something that they don't get to do, but our program does that for them. So there's a year-round program. There's currently 4 groups that do that, and they're being taught by some of the best educators in town, jazz musicians and educators. And then we have a summer camp every year. And so that happens the second or third week in June. And I'm bringing it up because it's not super expensive, but we have a lot of kids in the valley here that can't go unless they get a scholarship. So I'm just tossing it out there that, you know, if you're interested in investing in the future of jazz music, a scholarship or a part of a scholarship for a kid to attend camp is a pretty cool deal. And the camp is only $125. But for some kids, that's still a lot to come up with for their families. So anyway, I'm not going to like browbeat you as you go out the door or anything, but if you go to the Jazz Fresno website, you'll find a place where you can, if you want to, donate to Milestones, and you can put on there that it's for a jazz scholarship. You could do that. That's awesome. The second program is called We Got the Beat, which if you've never seen them, you got to look for them. They are incredible. This is like 3rd grade through like 8th grade. And it's a youth percussion group, and they're learning jazz standards, classic rock, Afro-Cuban music, and you have to see it to believe it. The things that she's able to teach them, it's pretty crazy. Their camp also happens at the beginning of summer, and scholarships are wonderful there too. So both of those things you can reach on the website. All right, enough of that business. So our presenter tonight is Steve Wilson, and he's going to take us on a wonderful tour of jazz history. Steve is a musician and educator from Santa Cruz. He's performed for many years with many, many groups. He's a trombonist. He's performed with the Santa Cruz Symphony, Cabrillo Music Festival Orchestra, and the Reed Street Brass Quintet. He's also played with multiple jazz and Latin groups, including Union Dues Big Band, Havana Jazz, and Midnight Mambo. He's performed and recorded with pop acts you might know. He's also performed several times in different ensembles at the Monterey Jazz Festival, and he's worked as a clinician and an educator for years. He's a composer. His band, Steve Wilson and Friends, features his original compositions in vocal and instrumental jazz. And he's a leader, composer, arranger with the vocal jazz quartet, Main Swing. And he's a pioneer in the use of conch shells in jazz. That I would love to see. Did you bring conch shells already? Okay. They also do Latin jazz and avant-garde music. And he's currently performs with Cabrillo Stage and the White Album Ensemble. He's also been a music instructor for 35 years at Cabrillo College in Aptos. He's teaching songwriting and music theory, and has worked as a vocal director. In the past, he's taught jazz ensembles, jazz choirs, jazz improvisation. So obviously, he's pretty qualified in the jazz world. I think you're going to be super excited to hear him play, and also the presentation. And he's got some really spectacular local musicians here with him, which I'm going to let him introduce. And so anyway, put your hands together, please, for Steve Wilson. He also brought, because he's involved with Cuba Jazz in Santa Cruz. So there's a calendar, some flyers and calendars back at the back table. You should really grab them. There's some heavy-hitting groups that we aren't able to bring here to the library that you might want to check out. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill, and thank you for coming this evening. One thing that Bill didn't mention, and that is that, yeah, I've been in Santa Cruz for over 35 years, but I grew up in Fresno. And I went to Fresno High School, went to Fresno City College, and I got my start as a professional musician here in Santa Cruz, here in Fresno. And I look back at that, and I was thinking about it the other day, and I realized just how fortunate I am to have played with the people I did while I was growing up and becoming a musician. And some of the people I played with, as a teenager and so forth, people like Mike Dana back there, Rick Seberg, Nate Ginsberg, Louis Pardini, Ernie Palazzo, Gary Newmark. These are some of the people I grew up playing with. So I had some really good experiences with those folks. And in fact, the last couple of those, Gary and Ernie, also Les Nunes, who's here. The reason I'm here tonight is because I ran into them a couple of months ago at the Coloma Jazz Center where we work in Santa Cruz. And first of all, how many of you people have been to the Coloma Jazz Center? Anybody? Aha, good. Coloma Jazz Center is one of the best jazz clubs in the solar system. I would say the galaxy, but I don't want to, kind of overstate it. No, but definitely the solar system. And actually, jokes aside, it really is one of the best jazz clubs in the world. I was there, I've been there since the beginning. Here's my T-shirt for my shirt. This is the 40th. This is a 5-year-old shirt. Club has been growing for 45 years. Some of the people we brought to Santa Cruz: Herbie Hancock, Chick Corea, Wynton Marsalis, Pat Metheny, Christian McBride. And when Christian comes, he always goes straight into the kitchen and helps out with, you know about that, right? He always goes in and helps out in the kitchen. He puts on an apron and comes back to the kitchen. Benny Green was there a couple of weeks ago, and he said that it's his favorite place to play in the world. And part of the reason is because people come in and it's a respectful crowd. They're there for the music. And as Bill pointed out, I brought some calendars. So if you want to come to hear some music at Coloma, you'll hear we've got some great people as always. Anyway, a couple of months ago, Billy Cobham was playing there, the drummer, and at least 3 guys from Fresno drove over with Gary Newmark, and Ed Ernie was there, and Les was there, and they drove over from Fresno. There he is, there's Ernie there. They drove over to Santa Cruz to catch this act, and I got to talking to Gary about it. And I told him that I had done a master class at Cobra a couple of times, and also once at the Mets Hall about the history of jazz. And I had a local trio playing with me. And we just went through different styles, and we're not going to, not a huge amount of detail, just kind of moving through things so you get an idea of how the different styles of jazz have evolved over the last 100 years or so. So anyway, so we're going to play some tunes for you, and as we do it, we're going to talk to you about what we do in each of these different styles that makes it different. Okay, so it's kind of a journey here for you. So just to start with going back in history, where did jazz come from? People ask that question. It really comes from 3 different continents: from Africa, Europe, and America. And it would never have happened if it hadn't been for all 3 of these things. The first jazz musicians were descendants of slaves. And they brought with them, they still had some very deep cultural resources about melody, things about that are different in Europe, things about rhythm that are different than Europe, things about vocalizing, all kinds of things. And by the end of the 19th century, they had access to a lot of European instruments. A lot of it was, after the Civil War, a lot of instruments were kind of offloaded by the military and so forth. And people started picking up these instruments that were very different from what They may have grown up playing, but you get the idea of, of musicians with this background starting to play on European instruments, on American soil, especially in the South and the Caribbean. And what happens when you get this kind of what Wynton Marsalis calls a gumbo? It's a mixture of all these different things. And when you get people with this background playing on European instruments and coming up with these different things, pianos and guitars and horns and things like that, you get ragtime, you get the blues, and you get jazz. And so we're going to be talking about some different aspects of jazz. And we're going to start, this is Rick Heltzer on keyboard. He's going to play a tune for you that was written in about 1918. And this is a Jelly Roll Morton style tune of he's going to play it in a Jelly Roll Morton style. The tune's called After You've Gone, all right? Okay, take it away, Rick. That was an old hymn. It was called Just a Closer Walk with Thee. A lot of early jazz was, you people playing in funeral marches, and they would play along, and then they would make some comment about the deceased, and everybody would go into a much more upbeat kind of thing. It's called a two-beat swing. We'll talk a little bit more about swing as we go along. The swing is really important in jazz, and it's a rhythm that comes from West Africa, and the way it's incorporated into American music is really a huge part of the history of jazz and popular music. To demonstrate a little bit of that, we're going to go and play a tune called In a Mellow Tone. And this is a tune that would have been from the big band era. And keep this in mind. I know a lot of times when people listen to old style swing music, you know, they think about old people. At least a lot of my students think about old people back in the old days. This was young people's music. Okay, we've got to always remember this was young people's music, and it was loud. We're not as loud because it's one horn here instead of 12 horns, right? We're over 15 horns. And back then, that's how you made loud music. Okay, our generation did not invent loud music, right? But back then, before that, you had to have a 60-piece orchestra, right? Then when you got some horns and drums and stuff like that, you could make a lot of noise with 20 people, right? Later on, when they got electric guitars and stuff like that, they started firing the horn section and doing without all those horns. But at the time, that was how you got loud, danceable music. So what I always try to remember about swing in the 30s is that it was pop dance music at the time. Sing, Sing, Sing was the #1 hit in 1939, right? So anyway, we're going to do In a Mellow Tone, which is a big band style swing. But we're going to first we're going to play it without swinging. And this is probably the hardest thing we're going to play all night, is to try to not swing. Okay? We're going to play this song without swinging. Okay, let's see if we can. 1, 2, 3, 4, 1. Anyway, so what we're going to do instead, now we're going to play it like a swing, okay? And then we're going to tell you a little bit about how we, what we do when we swing. Okay, so it's got to sound like this. 1, 2, 3, 4. So swinging, it is hard to put your finger on. In fact, if anybody ever tries to tell you mathematically exactly what swing is, don't listen to this because it's not that simple. It's kind of like what we call triplets, but not quite. And it's kind of like out of 8/16, but not quite. And it kind of depends on the exact style of swing, and it depends on the musicians. But it's something, and again, it comes from West Africa and the South and the Caribbean. There's just something that came about as a new interpretation of rhythm in the early part of the 20th century that is just very indelibly a part of jazz. Now, when I play swing as opposed to not swinging, I'm going to play the first of each two notes a little longer than the second, and I might put a little accent on the second one, and I'm going to play it kind of smoothly. So instead of the corny version, I'm going to go. That's kind of what I will do as a horn player or a singer, a person with a melody, kind of interpret the notes a little bit, so it's not straight. And the bass, what is the bass going to do, John?
Well, the thing that was great about, well,
Oh, there.
yeah, as a bass player, now you're going to play, instead of this kind of staccato walking bass line, now you're going to play a legato line where every note is connected to the next, so you can get this more forward-leaning feel. So you're going to play that same line. So you can hear the difference there. It's a lot less square now. It helps the band swing.
John Laffenberger, everyone. When you're swinging here, when we're playing the melody, what are you doing here?
Okay, one of the things that you might have noticed when I did the very first piece, that's kind of more in a New Orleans style, and the left hand is very active in kind of holding down the basic time feel. So in this particular music, and especially with Count Basie and Duke Ellington too, they began to like mix up and vary their rhythms, so there was a lot more syncopation, and the emphasis was not so much on timekeeping, but on just coloration and just putting the chords in interesting different places and getting different rhythmic emphasis. And as far as Steve was saying, the whole idea of swing eighth notes is it's everybody does it a little bit differently. Some people do it with a little less of the triplet feel. Other people do it with a little bit more. But you can see that I'm putting that emphasis on the upbeat is really important, you know, and also just the legato content.
Thank you. And Gary, want to tell us a little bit about, Gary's got a little cough here, but he'll be able to tell you a little bit about swing drumming.
Well, I'm thinking, what could I say that they haven't already said? That there's one little nuance thing that I think I can contribute here. There's it's kind of a pushy feel, like there's a rhythm called a shuffle, and so that would be like and so if you still hear that, like a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4, if you still hear that and you're just playing the quarter notes, you're feeling kind of like a 1, a 2, a 3, a 4. So it's kind of like something that you don't do, but you feel, and it kind of pushes things along. So, yeah, that's another idea.
Thank you, Gary Newmark. One other thing, you've heard the expression, friends don't let friends clap on 1 and 3. That's another thing about swing rhythm, and that is that, you guys, go ahead and play in a mellow tone again, and I'm going to clap in your too. Okay? All right, so just play from the top again. How 2, how 1. So if you clap, this 2, 3, clap it to 4, swings. Now stop. You guys keep playing. They're good listeners. Okay, now we're only going to do this once. We're going to clap on 1 and 3. 1, 2, 3, 4. 2, 3, 4. Stop. That's it. See what I mean? 1, 2, 1. The emphasis on 2 and 4. Don't know where it started, but it is certainly a big part of not just swing, but shuffle, R&B, and all kinds of different styles. And now there's some styles where one, polka, for example, works real well on 1 and 3, but 2 and 4 is where you want to go do like that. So all of these things create that swing, And as you go into say, don't mean a thing if you ain't got it, right? Okay, so as I said, by the late 1930s, 1939, that Benny Goodman tune I mentioned earlier, what's it called again? Sing, that's right. Number 1 tune, right? Everybody's listening to it. Now, 1940s, some things happened. World War II, for example, which one of the things, a lot of people were not available for bands anymore. Big bands, they didn't completely disappear, but you didn't have enough people all the time to play, these big bands, right? And one of the things, bands got smaller. Amplification started to happen, which made it a little easier to do a smaller group and things like that. But the style started to change also. Now, big band swing never completely disappeared, but some other types of music started kind of taking over. One of them is what we call bebop. Bebop is faster than your basic swing, but it still kind of swings. Interesting thing, though, the faster you go, the less it swings, the more it just kind of evens out. It's still a swing field, but the faster you go, and you have to play really light, okay? And bebop is a little bit more musicians' music than audience music. It didn't have as big a following. It's not dance music per se, but it's very personal. And it emphasizes a lot of improvisation. And it's one of the things you have to always come back to when you talk about jazz. Jazz is about improvisation. You play the melody and then you improvise over the chord changes. It's one of the things that makes jazz amazing, and it changes your brain waves when you're doing it. They've done studies where they put a musician into an MRI machine, and they had him play something that was memorized, Mozart or something like that, and then they had him improvise on something, and it takes you to an entirely different part of your brain. And so jazz has always been about improvisation, as well as stating the melody. And bebop is when that really took off. The personal statements of artistic musicians like Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie, became what was happening. So we're going to do a tune by Charlie Parker, otherwise known as Bird. And Charlie Parker, here's the thing, Charlie Parker was a saxophone player who reinvented what was possible on the saxophone. And everybody since then has been trying to catch up and realize what was possible. This is not a saxophone here. We're going to take it at a tempo where I can hopefully keep up with it, but keep in mind that when Parker played, it's a little bit faster. So this is a tune called Opera. One, two, three, people say blues, a lot of people think different things when you say the word blues. To me, blues is a number of things. Blues is a feeling. Blues is a tonality, which again comes from this whole thing of African tonalities blending with European instruments, and a lot of that comes out with blues tonality. And blues is also a form, okay? And it's what we call a 12-bar form, so 12 measures. In fact, you guys play that tune again, and I'm going to count this. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 4. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. And you're going to find that same form in Chuck Berry tunes, Little Richard tunes, Beatle tunes, in all kinds of tunes. It's in rock and roll. A lot of it's based on 12-bar blues. 12-bar blues can be played in lots of different styles. And so again, blues is it's just one aspect of the blues. And John Lennon once says the blues is a chair. It's like a piece of furniture. What you do with it is up to you, right? And there have been so many great tunes written in the 12-bar blues form, including the next one that we're doing, which is called Freddie Freeloader. This is interesting. This is by the 1950s. Again, bebop never disappeared entirely. There's still, lots of people love bebop and will play it, forever. But again, it's an up-tempo kind of style, and it's not real danceable. It's hard to play. By the 50s, there were some different kinds of things going on. They were, looking at some different styles, and one of them became cool jazz. The birth of the cool. Miles Davis, the great Miles Davis, who, was responsible for or involved with so many different styles of jazz. He was a bebopper for a while, and he became a cool jazzer, and he was a fusion player, and always a brilliant musician. But in the late 1950s, was it 58 or 59? I'm trying to, anybody remember what time, when Kind of Blue came out?
59.
59, yeah. 59, Kind of Blue. It's still the biggest selling jazz album in history. When we figure, it was Miles Davis, Bill Evans, Cannonball Adderley, John Coltrane, so many different people were on that album. And it was kind of, some of the things, a lot of it was kind of cool jazz. Instead of a slow down a bit, right? So this is a thing called Freddie Freeloader. It's still a 12-bar blues, but it's a lot cooler. And we're going to play it for you now. Okay. 1, 2, 2, 3. earlier, right? But still, we're still swinging, right? Okay, so 60s, a lot of different styles were happening during the 60s. First of all, rock and roll was kind of taking over everything, right, in terms of popular music. Civil rights movement, lots of things happening in the 60s, Vietnam, et cetera, different time, different kind of attitude in jazz. And in jazz, there's some great jazz in the 1960s. Blue Note Records had a lot of Art Blakey, the Jazz Messengers, Horace Silver, all kinds of great people. And a lot of it's categorized as something we call hard bop. Still bebop, it's got a lot of the same aspects of bebop, but a little slower, but a little bit more of an edge to it. Some gospel influence in it, some rock influence in it. And we're going to play a tune called Moanin'. This has got a real gospel influence from the Jazz Messengers. It was Art Blakey's group in the 60s. And check out some of their stuff. It's great music. Okay. Steve Bowman, another guy's opportunities. I should ask these guys, he just played like 4 tunes that were all swing, but all very different. You know, the big band swing, even before that, the 2-beat swing, big band, and then we did the bebop, and then we did the cool jazz, and then we did this, which is still swinging, but it's a little harder. And you guys got something to say about how you approach that last one, for example? I mean, for example, Gary, you want to say something?
Yeah, well, if I think about Art Blakey, I kind of think about his attitude, which is really aggressive, just kind of in your face. And so it's kind of raw, very raw, really. And that's kind of what's going through my mind.
Yeah.
But,
Yeah, instead of, bam, you know, just say, you can clap on 2 and 4, but, you know, a little bit more attitude.
And a great press flow.
Yeah. What about piano on that? You know, that's Bobby Timmons song.
Well, Bobby, I think, is underrated, but he's really one of the great jazz piano players. In fact, if you go back to his trio recording of this tune, he's just playing, and I was doing some poor imitations of some of his style. That probably wasn't all that successful, but he had the way of playing these really melodic, very bluesy lines, and then he could kind of sound like a big band on the other side, where he would actually play these really cool melodies in octaves with his right hand and do the harmonica accompaniment in his left hand. And it would sound like literally sound like a big band. And and this tune, I think, you know, it's got a lot of the church in it, you know. So.
Anything about bass players?
Can I go back to bebop?
Absolutely.
Yeah, the thing about bass, I'm gonna go back to opera bop, the
Yeah.
bebop blues that we played. And what happened in that period, Gary, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but drumming changed like night and day. And that changed bass playing. So now, instead of that bass drum on all 4 beats, now all the bass drums playing accents. It's kind of playing off the other limbs, right? So that frees the bass player up to be a lot more free with the time feel. The problem back then was it really didn't make that much difference to the bass players in that period because they're struggling with the instrument. But somewhere in there, we got amps and we could play loud.
49?
Yeah.
Something like that.
Well, I mean,
Yeah.
so the strings came down lower to the neck. Now we got a lot more mobility on the instrument. And time feel changed drastically for bass players. That's when that legato I was talking about really came in, because now the instrument is more singing, it's not thumping. And it changed the whole way the bass, it changed everything about it. When you got players like with Bill Evans' trio, bass players, that did phenomenal, amazing solos, as well as not playing that straight ahead time, you know. It just freed up the bass immensely.
Yeah. So in the 60s, you also start to see a lot of the building of Latin jazz. And when you think of jazz from Latin America, the 2 countries that really you think about when you think about Latin American jazz are Brazil and Cuba. And they're really 2 kind of different flavors of jazz. One of the things is they use what we call straight 8th notes instead of swinging with 8th notes with 1 and 2, so it's more of a straight form in that sense. When I think of playing Brazilian versus Cuban, I think Brazilian is being kind of cool, and Brazilian is being more, and Cuban being hot. Like they both are Latin jazz, but the rhythms are a little different. And we're going to play one example of each. And if you listen to this, we'll play Brazilian tune that'll be a little smoother, cooler, more legato, as we say. And then we'll play a Cuban tune for you as well. But we're going to play a tune by Antonio Carlos Jobim, the composer, Girl from Ipanema, Desafinado, all those. This one's called Triste. He was very, very, very popular in the 1960s and beyond. I think when the year the Beatles came out, the album that won the Grammy that year was not the Beatles album, but it was Getz Gilberto, which was with Antonio Carlos Jobim and Stan Getz and Gilberto, who just passed away last year. Bossa Nova, wonderful art form. If you listen to it, it's a fabulous style of music, and we'll attempt to translate a little bit of Bossa Nova for you right now. Please. So I don't want to suggest that all Brazilian music is really chill like that, but bossa nova is. But samba and other styles, it's more up-tempo and energetic. There's something very special about the bossa nova. And João Gilberto, who just passed away in the last year or so, was possibly the main proponent of this. It's a very intimate kind of music. It's very gentle and you know, as I said, very personal and intimate. It's lovely to play. In Cuban music, you know, there's some different styles as well. There's, you know, cha-cha and so forth. I'm going to play a mambo for you. And to talk about Cuban music, you have to talk about clave. clave is not just something, you know, the claves are those little wooden sticks, you know, that you play. But it's not just an instrument. Clave is a feel, and it's a deep feel. Comes from Africa, and there's different kinds of clave. And clave has to do with tension and resolution. So if you have what we call a 3-2 clave, and there's a 3-2 solo clave, and there's 3 pulses on the first measure, and then there's 2 pulses on the second. It kind of represents tension and resolution. Be like. It's the Bo Diddley beat, by the way, actually. He tried to copyright that, by the way, Bo Diddley did, but it's been around for a while. Anyway, so, that's called a 3-2 solo clave. And if you turn it around, it's. And the clave stays the same through the entire piece. You never turn the clave around. Okay, and the clave you don't play every single. Gary's not going to do. He's not going to play every single measure, but it will be implied all the time. The only way that you change the clave if you want to go from 3-2 to 2-3, you have an odd number of measures. You have like a 7-measure phrase. That'll turn the clave. Okay, so here's what we're going to do. This is a tune called At the Mambo Inn, and this is going to be a 2-3 clave. And a couple times I may ask you to kind of play along, you know, with that, and you'll just feel that clave is part of what creates the sound. Also, there's a piano figure called a montuno, which is part of Cuban playing. And you'll hear Rick play that. And there's also a bass style called tumbao. Tumbao is not obvious or easy to play. John's doing a very good job with it, as you'll hear in a couple minutes. And it is a rhythmic pulse that's different than other styles, okay? So listen to those things as we go and see if you can pick up the clave, and we're going to play a little At the Mambo Inn for you. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. traditionally, in a lot of Cuban bands, you would not see a drum set like this. You would have 2 or 3 different percussionists, one playing timbales, one playing congas, maybe one playing some hand percussion. Very good, well, nice job covering that though in this here. And when you've got a drum set, yeah. So by the 1970s, rock music had pretty much, taken over the airwaves in a lot of ways. A lot of jazz musicians were kind of trying to figure out what to do, and it's kind of, some of them was like, if you can't beat them, join them, sort of thing. And that was part of what jazz fusion is all about. Not entirely, I'm not trying to make it sound, that crass, but a lot of times incorporating jazz, or rock into jazz and so forth, was what came up with a lot of the great bands of the 1970s. And Herbie Hancock is certainly one of the great composers and players of that era. Also Chick Corea and various folks along that. A lot of people came along. Steps Ahead was another group. It was a little bit later. Weather Report. Some great bands in the 70s that incorporated rock music along with the jazz tradition. And you can kind of tell if it's jazz because it's jazz musicians. As they change things, they'll adopt different things, and it's still jazz because it's jazz musicians, right? And we're going to do a tune by Herbie Hancock, who, again, is one of the greatest musicians of the 20th and 21st century, and this one's called Cantaloupe Island. All right. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. met these guys this evening for the first time. I've known Gary for 40 years and what a long time. We had reunited in the last few months. But I just met these guys tonight. We rehearsed together for about 45 minutes. And that's what the jazz language is about. It's a universal language. You can go to Tokyo, you can go to Paris, you can go to Istanbul, you can go anywhere in the world and go into a jazz club and say all the things you are, key of A flat, 1, 2. And literally, people, it's an amazing thing. And I don't think there's any other style of music that's quite like that. And really enjoyed playing with you guys. Anyway, as we move forward here, that ended us up maybe around 1980 or so. And, that's 40 years ago. Jazz is still happening, and jazz is still doing all kinds of things. I go to concerts at Cuba all the time, and I hear amazing stuff. The difference is, it's hard to kind of pin it down. It's kind of hard to say 90s jazz is a certain thing. There's a lot of kind of retro stuff that Wynton Marsalis and some other people, a lot of kind of looking back, which is great. But there's also a lot of just movement, a lot of different direction, a lot of world music and various things, and it's become very eclectic. One of the things that I think is important to point out, though, is with the kind of rise of hip hop and rap, that has been something that has influenced a lot of styles, including jazz. And interestingly, the last 3 tunes that we played what's it called, Cantaloupe Island with straight 8th and 1 and 3 and 3 and 4 and like that. We played a Brazilian tune, which is 1, 2, 3, 4. We played a Cuban tune, 1, 2, straight 8th notes. Interesting thing about hip hop is that the swing starts to come back. And I happen to think that hip hop is closer to the early days of jazz than a lot of other styles of music are. You get this kind of a thing going. It's kind of a shuffle funk, if you will. And we're going to do a tune that I wrote back in 2012, I guess it was. Originally recorded as a real fast swing tune, but I've kind of gotten to the point where I like playing it more like a little hip hop kind of feel. This is called Epiphany, and the future will riff on this one. I want, a 2. I want, 3. I want, 2. we're gonna do one more tune for you, and I was trying to figure out how to end this, and I decided to go, when I first did this workshop, with something called postmodern. Anybody familiar with postmodern? Postmodern jukebox? Check it out, go to YouTube. There's a group on YouTube called Postmodern Jukebox. And it's a thing that people are doing, and this is kind of what jazz musicians have done since the beginning. They take something else and they turn it into jazz. And that's what we do. We take something, listen to Louis Armstrong sing to him, Hello Dolly. He's taken it and turned it into jazz. And this is what has been done for 100 years. And what they're doing with postmodern is taking contemporary pop songs and turning them into jazz, different styles of jazz. And what we're going to do for you is a tune called Havana. It was, da-da-da-da-da-da. It was real popular a year or two ago. We're going to play this, but we're going to play it like Art Blakey in 1962. Okay? And so we're going to end this with you. And thank you so much for coming out this evening. This is Havana. 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. Yes. Nothing to do, that's fine.
No.
Ragtime. Ragtime is a very interesting kind of thing. Ragtime is, most people don't think of ragtime as actual jazz, it's kind of pre-jazz. You know, and it's African Americans playing piano and interpreting a almost classical style in a very different way. That is just, some people call it jazz. I call it pre-jazz, but it's definitely got that impulse. And part of the reason it's not maybe true jazz is it's not improvised. Is that it's written out and played pretty much note for note. If you listen to the Joplin rags, but they kind of swing, and you've got this kind of composite of African and European kind of feels, but just a little before jazz. Yeah.
What about Zydeco?
Zydeco. I'm not an expert on that, but it's a Cajun style. It's fun stuff. Yeah, and it's anybody know more about Zydeco than I do? I've been to New Orleans. Yeah, you should go. Any other questions? Yeah.
Can you extrapolate on the concept of there's no such thing as a wrong note in jazz? Some notes are better than others.
Well, there is. There's a wrong note if you don't know how to escape from it. In other words, if you play, there's no note that you can't play that you can't escape from, right? That if you hit a note, you're going to be able to, even if you hit the worst note, if you get out of it quickly enough, you can escape from it. The problem is that if you hit a note and then you can't get out of it, it sounds bad. It's kind of that whole thing of people. Well, Miles said, don't worry about mistakes. There are none. But and again, people take that the wrong way because it's all about how you deal with that mistake. And in that sense, it's kind of like life, isn't it? It's like you can hit a wrong note, and it's only wrong if you continue to insist that it's wrong. And no, it's true. And if you play a wrong note, you might repeat it. And then if it's really bad, repeat it again. Then all of a sudden, you made something up new. Somebody else had a question here? Yeah.
You hit a clamp.
Yeah, you hit a clamp.
Do it again.
Do it again, exactly, yeah. Exactly. But it's really, how many of you play jazz out here? Okay, it's fun, isn't it? And it's liberating. It's a great, not a great way to make a living, but in the sense of it's a wonderful thing to do because it just what it does, your expression and your mind and everything. It's a fabulous art form, and it's I think one of America's greatest contributions to world culture as far as I'm concerned is jazz, and really. So yeah.
Hey, was that wonderful? How about another hand for Steve Jackson? Hey, actually, I just want to say, we happen to be at the library, and the cool thing is they actually have a pretty cool CD collection over there. So if you heard something tonight, like Kind of Blue, and you didn't know it was like the greatest selling jazz album of all time, you should check that out. It's a really great album. I'll make you a deal. I will put the set list for tonight on the Jazz Fresno Facebook page. So go there, hopefully by tomorrow, and you'll have the tunes in case you can't remember what they all were, who the artist was, and then you can check it out, either check one out at the library, or, it's cool if you check out something on YouTube or whatever, but like when you dig it, go buy it. And then, support the music. So there's that. And then while you're there, you can subscribe to the Jazz Fresno Facebook page. And super cool, if you go on Facebook, you would get announcements about like other cool jazz that's happening in town in case you want to check stuff out. So we'll be back here again next month on the third Tuesday. And I believe, I can't remember if it's next month or it's coming up, we do have another presentation that will also cover sort of the historical perspective. So anyway, thank you for coming out. Support your local library. Make sure you tell them thank you for having us here because it's really amazing to have a location that we can do this. It's not as easy to do as you think. We are a volunteer-run organization. There's like no cash. So like having this happen is pretty amazing. And these guys, even when they do get paid, it's not a great deal. They do it because they love it. So. If you would like to get, sometimes we send out email notifications. If there's a clipboard back there, you can put your email address on. I promise we won't sell it.
If you
So
wanna
thank you so
become a
much. Have a great night, everybody.